I'd like to welcome you again to today's TechNet webcast. This is Security for SharePoint Products and Technologies, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's TechNet presenter. We have Michael Murphy with us, and Michael is part of the Microsoft Across America team. So Michael, it's all yours.
Thank you, Janet. I appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Michael Murphy. That is my email address up there, mjmurphy@microsoft.com, mjmurphy@microsoft.com. And you can feel free to email me with questions following this webcast if there's additional follow-up, because as Janet mentioned, we unfortunately do not have anybody on backup to answer questions. And so I'm going to try to leave some time at the end of the session to answer your questions. And as I can and where appropriate, I may try to answer some of them as we work through the material. And so, for example, one of the gentlemen has the question, will we discuss what kind of possibilities you have as a web part designer? And today we're going to be talking really about security. And so what we're going to be covering today is around how SharePoint 2007 was designed around a central vision and related goals. Along with outlining these goals, we want to discuss the security environments involved with SharePoint 2007. We will also go over different authentication methods and look at the benefits and some of the limitations with particular authentication methodology. We'll look at management of permissions. Of course, that's vital when you're looking at securing your SharePoint servers. We'll talk about the management of permissions and their role with SharePoint groups. And we'll go over the different permission levels and new permissions available with SharePoint 2007. We'll also review access rights that can be used with the SharePoint server. SharePoint 2007, I think it's important to note that SharePoint 2007 can be set up within a web farm environment. And one of the things I want to discuss today is the configuration of a web farm, and I think we want to review the web farm topology, secure topology, securing communications, and security hardening. And I am hopeful that by the ending of this session, we will all have a better understanding of the security methodology as well as the new security features that are offered in SharePoint 2007. And as we go through today's session, you will hear various Microsoft acronyms and terminology. While we will explain all new terms related to today's session, there are some general terms from the industry or from other versions of Microsoft products that I won't spend time on. To help you out, I've listed the areas that may be helpful to be familiar with either prior to this session or for your own reference afterwards. You should have experience supporting Windows servers, including Windows Server Management and typical maintenance tasks. You should have experience supporting Microsoft domain networks, Active Directory environments. I want to introduce the newest version of Windows SharePoint services, so it would be helpful if you had some experience with or knowledge of Windows SharePoint Service version 2, including portal sites. SharePoint Portal Server has been replaced with Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. So you will see when you're looking out online, folks, one of the things that you'll see these days is MOS, and that's Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007, right? And that replaces the previous versions of SPS. So some knowledge of the previous versions will be helpful when we're covering the history of SharePoint and to understand and reference the improvements with this latest version. I've divided this session up into the following agenda items, and they are these. We'll begin the session with a discussion of the different authentication methods and their roles within SharePoint 2007. We will also review the limitations in authentication. Next, we will discuss different permissions and access rights available in SharePoint 2007, and we will also review new permissions that are now available in SharePoint 2007. Finally, we'll examine the configuration of the web farm for SharePoint 2007, from secure topologies and communications to security hardening. So let's start by taking a look at the security environment. And I think we would agree that security for an internal team or department focuses on recommending ideal security configurations and settings for a group within the larger organization that uses Windows SharePoint services or Office SharePoint Server. Now, this guidance is targeted for a 1 or 2 server deployment and assumes that the server computers are not hosted by the primary IT group within the organization. The guidance for the internal team or department environment relies on the security of the overall network environment. Many of the default settings in Windows SharePoint Services and Office SharePoint Server are intended to be used in this environment. Now, this environment is not intended for multiple teams or projects where secure isolation of content is a requirement. If your group requires secure isolation of content, a greater number of servers or a greater level of security than is provided by your overall network environment, use the guidance for the internal IT hosted environments. And so there are a variety of different implementations, and we want to talk about those. If the IT department is hosting, or we can talk about security guidance for the internal IT hosted environment. This targets guidance to an IT team that is hosting Windows SharePoint services, Office SharePoint Server web applications, and sites for multiple teams and departments in an organization. This guidance focuses on securing a server farm environment, including isolating content between groups, securing server-to-server communication and client-server communication, hardening servers for specific roles, and configuring Windows SharePoint services, Office SharePoint Server features securely. Guidance for this environment assumes that all server computers reside within a single internal network. There is also the possibility of external users. I want external users to be able to access my internal resources. What does that security guidance for the external environment look like? And clearly this is targeted to hosting content for users who do not have general access to your corporate network. Now, this environment allows external partners to participate in a workflow or to collaborate on content together with your organization's employees. This environment is also intended to support remote employee access, where employees are working from home or are traveling and need to access sites and data without logging into the corporate network, right? It assumes no VPN access. Guidance for this environment focuses on isolating web applications or content to ensure that participants only see and have access to the projects that they are authorized to work on. It also relies on authenticating and securing communication between contributors and the server farm. Finally, it protects back-end servers from direct user interaction and secures the server farm against risks associated with hosting internet-facing servers. Then finally, there is the question of anonymous access. And security guidance for an external anonymous environment is targeted to allow anonymous access to content from the internet while protecting the server farm environment from the risks associated with hosting internet-facing servers. This environment can include multiple farms for testing, staging, and publishing content. Guidance for this environment focuses on making content anonymously available. In addition, it secures communication between farms as content is deployed to the publishing farm and ensures that content caching does not expose sensitive data. Lastly, it protects back-end servers from direct user interaction and secures the farm against risks associated with hosting internet-facing servers in an anonymous environment. And so these are the four principal security environments that I can create and define leveraging Microsoft Office SharePoint Server. Internal, small internal access only for a single group using a limited number of servers. IT hosted, internal only, but more secure, larger number of servers, more scalable solutions. External access, and finally anonymous external access. And we want to look at these variety of environments today. Let's talk. So in all of these cases, users will connect to the SharePoint servers, and in order to access content, they're going to have to be authenticated, right? So how do we use authentication, and what are the authentication mechanisms provided? And I think we know, right, we all know what user authentication is. It's the process that we use to validate the user account that is attempting to gain access to a website or network resource. You manage security using users and security groups. You cannot use distribution lists to control access to content in Windows SharePoint services because distribution lists are not used for authentication in Windows, right? That's the difference between distribution groups in Active Directory and security groups in Active Directory. I can't assign access to resources with distribution lists or distribution groups. User authentication for Windows SharePoint services is based on Internet Information Services authentication methods. Windows SharePoint services can be used with anonymous authentication, basic authentication, integrated Windows authentication, and certificate authentication. You choose the authentication method you want to use when you set up your web server. You cannot change the authentication method by using Windows SharePoint Services Administration tools. You must use Internet Information Services Administration tool for your server computer to change the authentication method. With SharePoint 2007, you can also use Windows authentication. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. Windows authentication. So authentication in Windows SharePoint Services 2.0, one of the previous versions of this product, is based on Windows accounts and their associated security IDs. In a practical sense, this means that Windows SharePoint Services 2.0 is tightly coupled with Active Directory when used in anything but the smallest deployments. Now, this dependency has not been a problem for companies that already deployed Active Directory when they started using Windows SharePoint Services 2.0 and Windows SharePoint Portal Server 2003 for building intranet-based solutions because they already had an Active Directory structure in place. Using Windows SharePoint Services 2.0 and Windows SharePoint Portal Server 2003 has been more challenging for companies building extranet-based solutions. The traditional tight coupling of Windows SharePoint Services 2.0 to Active Directory has traditionally put companies in a position where they had to create and maintain domain accounts for external users such as vendors and customers. It can also be said that Windows SharePoint Services 2.0 has gained a certain reputation, if you will, as a product that isn't appropriate for internet-facing sites because a lot of folks don't want to create those Active Directory accounts for unknown users coming to the site for the first time from across the internet, right? That's traditionally been the concern there. It's important to note that all of this changes with Windows SharePoint Services 3.0. because authentication has been redesigned on top of the new authentication provider infrastructure introduced with ASP.NET 2.0. So if you don't want to maintain user accounts for Windows SharePoint Services 3.0 and Office SharePoint Server 2007 sites inside Active Directory, you can build or acquire an ASP.NET authentication provider that's been designed to store and manage user accounts in a different identity repository. So we've separated, we've partitioned out that complete dependency on Active Directory. And that's going to mean that building extranet-based applications will be will be more simple and provide fewer challenges moving forward. One of the things you could do, for example, ASP.NET 2.0 ships with the Forms authentication provider. And what this does is it lets me maintain user accounts in a SQL Server database. So this authentication provider can be configured for use in a Windows SharePoint Services 3.0 site with really little effort on your part. You can put a Windows SharePoint Services 3.0 site on the internet that allows unknown users to register themselves as members. ASP.NET 2.0 provides you with convenient support for creating and maintaining user accounts, and can even allow users to change and reset their passwords. There's an IT pro user group in Manhattan. Maybe some of you know it, the New York Windows Enterprise Servers Group. And if you go up to their website, you can join the website, and this is essentially what they've done, leveraging the ASP.NET 2.0 provider. So what does this ASP.NET authentication look like? So ASP.NET has what is can only be described as a pluggable authentication framework. And basically what that means is the user identity is independent from the operating system identity. Also, the authentication has custom code that can handle the authentication. The framework contains two related providers. First, you've got the membership provider. Now, this is used based on user identity. Second, you've got the role provider, and this offers roles, groups, and attributes for a user. You've also got, you've also got other out-of-box providers with ASP.NET authentication. Office SharePoint Server 2007 includes an LDAP pluggable provider for authenticating users of Office SharePoint Server 2007. This is in addition to the Active Directory provider included with Windows SharePoint Services. SQL Server is the relational database used for storing all content, data, and configuration information used by Office SharePoint 2007. SQL Server 2005 is recommended. SQL Server 2005 Express is included as a default part of the installation. However, if you've got SQL Server 2000, there's no reason you couldn't leverage that as an alternative. And SQL Server Express, SQL Server 2005 Express, is the free version of SQL Server, right? It's SQL Server Lite, if you will. If anybody is interested in that, you can download it for free online. It's available out there. You can get it. You can play with it. And as I mentioned, it is part of the default installation with MOS 2007. Now, Active Directory, or single domain only authentication, is also available to you. However, and I want to be clear about this, unlike previous versions of SharePoint, you are not limited to Active Directory authentication for SharePoint 2007. Right? We talked about now you can use the ASP.NET Forms authentication, which offers you more expandability when authenticating users. If you want to use external partner authentication, ASP.NET authentication is really the ideal solution for you. For authentication, You may want to configure your application. So what are some of the options with that? Let's talk a little bit about the config files and try to expand an understanding of the config files. So the .NET framework, and ASP.NET in particular, uses XML formatted config files to configure applications. Now, right off the bat, as soon as you hear those letters, XML, what I think of immediately is that XML is portable. That means that these configuration files are portable. If I edit them in one place, I can copy them and I can take them to other places easily, right? And furthermore, they're modular in their nature. So there are data definitions and sections of data in there, and I can pull those out or add them in at will. That's the beauty, the extensibility, the portability of XML. So understanding that ASP.NET in particular uses XML formatted configuration files to configure applications is essential to understanding what you can do with these and to exploiting them for your own needs, right? And let me personal opinion, Janet, you can edit this out later if you want. The function of technology, it's not to exist for its own sake, but rather technology exists to be exploited by people so that they can get done what they need to get done, right? And if this thing doesn't do what you need it to do, well, all right, so how do I get it to do what I need it to do? The .NET framework relies on these .config files to define your configuration options. These .config files are text-based XML files, and there are multiple .config files on every single system. System-wide configuration settings for the .NET framework are defined in the machine.config file. The default settings that are contained in the machine.config file can be modified to affect the behavior of .NET applications on the whole system. There's a Secure Your Web Server guide published by Microsoft that includes recommendations for configuring the machine.config files. Again, that's the Secure Your Web Server guide. And you can find that if you just do a search for Secure Your Web Server, should be at Microsoft.com, should be in the top 5 choices there. Now, you can change the ASP.NET configuration settings for a single application if you create a file called web.config in the root folder of the application. When you do this, the settings in the web.config file override the settings in the machine.config file. So default settings are in machine.config. Application-specific settings are found in the web.config file that you create and edit in the root folder for your application. When you extend a web application using the central administration site, Windows SharePoint Services and Office SharePoint Server automatically creates a web.config file for the web application. Again, the Secure Your Web Server additions document published by Microsoft lists recommendations for securing web.config files. Now, these recommendations are intended to be applied to each web.config file that is created, including the web.config file for the central administration site. So if you're looking to do this kind of thing and edit and create your own configuration files or better understand the machine.config file defaults, there are 2 documents you want to look for online: Secure Your Web Server Guide and Secure Your Web Server Additions Guide. Both of these are published by Microsoft and available for download from Microsoft.com. What are some of the limitations or some of the concerns that I might have around using ASP.NET authentication? Well, there's a couple things here. So firstly, the authentications can only be used with browser clients. So the search crawler is limited in where it must see Windows. Also, the Office client interaction is somewhat degraded. In addition, as opposed to using integrated Active Directory or integrated Windows authentication. In addition, there's only one authentication type per web app. With ASP.NET Authentication, there are no windows and forms in the same domain. Therefore, there can only be one provider pair per domain. And then finally, with ASP.NET Authentication, Forms accounts are used instead of Windows accounts. The Forms user is not the same as the Windows user, so there may be some discrepancies when authenticating. Let's move on to a discussion of managing permissions and what this looks like. So a couple of things here. SharePoint groups can create a new permissions management experience. By default, there are three groups that can be used. First, you've got owners, and with owners, you are able to gain full control access, right? Clearly. Next, you've got members. Members can contribute to existing lists and library. Now, visitors, on the other hand, are limited to read-only access. Through these groups, you are able to integrate with the user information list. SharePoint groups can also be assigned permissions anywhere in the site collection. So these three default SharePoint groups, and I can see owners maps to traditional full control access, members would map to traditional contribute or contributor access, and then visitors read only. With Office SharePoint Server 2007, or MOS, and I'm going to, I may refer to it as MOS. It's just a lot easier than saying Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007. MOS provides permission levels, and the number of permission levels is not fixed. So SharePoint Server has 8 default permission levels for publishing-enabled sites: Viewer, Design, Contribute, Read, Limited Access, Approver, Hierarchy, and Manager. Now, in addition to those 8, you can also create permission levels and configure the rights for them. So I have a very granular level of control. What are permission levels? Well, what they are is a collection of rights, right? Not a collection of people. A group is a collection of people. Permission levels are collections of rights, what those folks can do who are assigned that level of permission. Within permissions, there are different levels to choose from. So, for example, a user could be assigned full control, or he or she would have full control of that item. Next, you've got design rights. Design rights can be applied to a user with the design permission selected. The user will be able to view, add, update, delete, approve, and customize the item. Contribute permissions allows users to view, add, update, and delete. However, they do not have the authority to approve or customize. Finally, a user can be given read-only permissions. With this permission selected, the user can only view the item and is unable to add, update, or delete it. It should also be noted that the permission levels are customizable and inheritable across the site collection. So if we were to go back to that question that had come up earlier, the question of web part and web part design, while we're not going to go into that today, clearly we can see from this discussion that if I wanted to be able to do those things, the level of permission that I would require would be either full control or design permission. And as I suggested earlier, you have the option. You have the option of creating customizable permission levels and fine-grained permissions. So let's take a look. What does that mean exactly? And let's talk about that a little bit. So if I want to perform more fine-grained authorization based on the roles of each user. So for example, maybe I have one user who needs to have read-write permissions on an operation, while another would only require read access. With SharePoint 2007, there are various new schedule objects available, such as website and lists and libraries. Most importantly, the new securable objects are also available in folders within the lists and libraries and documents or list items. There is a user interface available that is consistent from top to bottom. You will have a consistent access of permission levels where you will be able to apply the same levels as with SharePoint 2007. In addition, the interface allows you to inherit permissions from parent or unique permissions. There are also different administrators within SharePoint 2007. Site collection administrators are users with full control over all content in the site collection. The site collection administrators have three major roles within SharePoint security. First, they have the ability to fix lockout problems. When other users aren't able to gain permission to handle a locked out user, the site collection administrator can access the user's locked status and free it. Secondly, the site collection administrator can access and recover documents from the second level recycle bin. Recovery and access is no longer required by a central administrator. Finally, the site collection administrator cannot be removed from permissions. Let me say that again. The site collection administrator cannot be removed from permissions. This person is able to maintain permissions without having another user remove his or her rights. Central administrators no longer have default full access to content. So in order to gain full access to content, it will need to be manually adjusted or a different role assigned. Also, central administrators can grant themselves access to any content. They can now grant access to security policy, site collection owners, and administrators. So for auditing purposes, both of these actions will be logged in the event log. With SharePoint 2007, it is worth noting that there are some new permissions available. Let's take a look at what they look like. Firstly, we have this edit user information. And again, this is new in SharePoint 2007, folks, right? So for those of us in prior versions of SharePoint or supporting earlier versions of SharePoint, these will not be available to you, but those of us looking at deploying MOS, these are some of the benefits that you gain. Again, this idea of granular control, of more control. And that's something that we consistently see among the Microsoft product sets that are coming out today, is a greater and greater finer level of control. So with SharePoint 2007, I've got a wide variety of new permissions available. So first, you are now able to edit user information, such as a display name or email. I can assign that right to edit user information. Approve items. You are now able to approve items and promote minor versions to major version status. New in 2007 is the ability to view or delete versions. The creation of alerts. is now separated from view items. With management, you can now create alerts from other people. Using enumerate permissions is another tool that is now available in SharePoint 2007. You can read the permissions, however, you are not able to change them, simply to enumerate them, to list them. Open items. With open items, you can now view the source of server files, the ASPX files. In SharePoint 2007, you are able to set permissions to view application pages. So, for example, layout pages can now have permissions applied to be viewed. Another added permission is the use of remote interfaces. So I can now set up permissions to use remote interfaces like SOAP. And finally, you can set up permissions to use client integration features. So for example, I can now create a permission to use the integration features for applications like Microsoft Office. There is also availability for anonymous access. And anonymous access looks like this. Let me just take a sip of this. Anonymous authentication provides access to users who do not have server accounts on the server computer. Like folks who hit your SharePoint, your internet-facing SharePoint site from over the web. IIS will create the anonymous account for web services. When IIS receives an anonymous request, it impersonates the anonymous account. Anonymous access must be enabled in IIS before you can enable it for a website. With SharePoint 2007, this feature is disabled and turned off by default. Now, you can also enable or disable anonymous access with central administration. The website level control is able to turn on or off the anonymous access feature, and it allows anonymous lists, although with limited access. There is a list level control where I can read, add, update, and delete. Also, there is a read-only access for the library level control. Anonymous access has very reduced permissions by default, and you can certainly understand why, right? If I don't know who you are, I don't want you to muck up what I've built. So very reduced permissions by default. On most occasions, anonymous access will only be allowed read-only access. Also, there is no access to remote interfaces or client integration. Otherwise, anonymous access can be configurable through the object model. There is no folder or item level control with anonymous access. And then lastly to mention here, there are some hard-coded limitations where there are no anonymous authoring of documents or administration. Now clearly disabling the anonymous authoring of documents is going to be important so that anonymous visitors can't upload viri or worms potentially, any kind of malicious code to my site. Use of shared services is beneficial in 2007. Let's talk about shared services a bit here. So within your data services, you may wonder what services and tools you can use. Conceptually similar to shared services in SharePoint Portal Server 2003, the shared services component has been completely restructured and redesigned in SharePoint 2007 using a new services provider model. Shared services includes virtually all of the services that are used by multiple applications in SharePoint 2007. The Business Data Catalog is essentially a catalog of business applications that are of interest to SharePoint Server 2007 users. And it bridges the gap between the portal and business applications by bringing in key data from various applications to SharePoint sites, lists, search, and user profiles. The Business Data Catalog is the key infrastructure component around which most of the other business data features of SharePoint 2007 are built. It provides impersonation and delegation within SharePoint 2007, where it contains Kerberos-constrained delegation. Kerberos, of course, is the authentication mechanism in Active Directory, right? As well as Office Server single sign-on. In essence, the Business Data Catalog is a trusted subsystem within SharePoint 2007. Now, shared services can also utilize Excel Trusted Locations. So an administrator controls these locations by maintaining a list of directory paths as trusted locations. Excel Services checks this list before opening any workbook and will not load and execute a workbook until it comes from a trusted location. With user profile rights, shared services attains property visibility within SharePoint 2007. Let's take a look at security policy configuration. Within your security policy, the central enforced permissions for all sites are in the web application. Grant and deny permissions are available, as well as the bound to web application and zone. So for example, you could use full read access when searching crawling accounts, auditors, and legal compliance. Then deny all permissions could be used for security control and regulatory compliance. Finally, the deny write scenario could be used with extranet lockdown. So for those folks accessing the site over the internet, they are denied the ability to write files or directories back up to that SharePoint site. There are also some new security configurations available. So rights mask, blocked file types, form digest timeouts, safe control lists. These are all available configurations with SharePoint 2007. Office Server single sign-on creates credentials for server-to-server hop, and they can also have unique or shared aspects. Let's take a second before we look at configuring the web farm. Let me take a look in the question manager here because I see we have another question asked. Can you recommend, or is there any specific antivirus to use in this environment? So, ladies and gentlemen, if I may suggest, I would not recommend any one of our trusted antivirus partners over another. But rather, I would take the time to look at the antivirus offerings that are out there and see if any of them have particular feature sets or functions that are integrated with SharePoint or can integrate with SharePoint, and do a comparison feature, right? I mean, look, if you have a favorite antivirus solution, certainly, you know, we have an interest in seeing our partners at McAfee, at Trend Micro, Symantec, etc. We have an interest in seeing them succeed. And so if you have a favorite provider of antivirus, I would look to them first. Now, I would also encourage you to take a look. Microsoft has recently acquired a company called Antigen. And with the Antigen technology, we've created a set of products called Forefront. And the Forefront, and the Forefront family of security products offers a great Windows integration experience. And so what I would encourage everybody that's looking for antivirus solutions in this environment to do is to do some testing of what's out there, do some comparative analysis based on deployability, scalability, manageability, and cost, and then make your own decisions in that regard. That would be my only comments regarding particular antivirus. Okay. So with that said, let's take a look at configuring the web farm, and let's talk a little bit about configuring the web farm. There are many permutations of topologies, almost an infinite array of topologies that can be built using Microsoft Office SharePoint Portal Server 2003. But only a small number of these topologies are actually supported by Microsoft. So the simplest topologies are the single server and small server farm topologies. An example of the small server topology is one server running SQL Server 2000 and one server running SharePoint assigned the web search job and index services. So now again, there are lots of things you can do, but there are standards based on our understanding of the product that we will support. This small farm configuration is one of them. Single server and small farm configuration are two of them. Then you've got medium farm. And a medium farm topology requires at a minimum one front-end web server running the search application, one index job server running SharePoint Portal Server 2003, and one database server running Microsoft SQL. And that traditionally has been Server 2000 with Service Pack 3A or later. Additional servers can be added to this topology to enable higher availability, higher capacity, or both. But you cannot have a medium farm with fewer than 4 servers. So an example of a medium topology would be 1 or 2 servers running SharePoint assigned the web service, more commonly known as front-end web servers, and running SharePoint assigned the search job and index services, and 1 server running SQL Server. Then the large farm topology. And large server farm topologies can get much more complex. So a large server farm topology can consist of 2 to 8 servers running SharePoint assigned the web service, again more commonly known as a front-end web server, 2 to 4 servers running SharePoint assigned the search service, 1 to 4 servers running SharePoint assigned the index service, one of which must be assigned the job server role, and any number of servers running SQL Server. In all supported topologies, you can use a single additional server running SharePoint for the purpose of running the backward compatible document library. Now, I would make the argument that there are 2 factors that differentiate a medium farm from a large farm. And the first factor is the server component matrix. Now, this is where you will need more servers to run a minimum large farm. The second difference is that the web and search components run on all front-end web servers in a medium farm. However, on a large farm, these components must each run on separate servers. Medium server farms become large server farms by adding web search front-end servers, using network load balancing to distribute the load, and by adding search and indexing servers to the server component matrix. As long as you stay within the boundaries of a prescribed server farm, any combination of these can be employed. Only 4 index servers can exist in a large server farm because each server can only consume 4 separate catalogs. The most common medium farm topology consists of 2 front-end web servers running search and indexing job servers and 1 SQL component for a total of 4 servers. The SQL component can be either a single server or a clustered server. Because the cluster acts like one system, it will be considered as one component. SharePoint Portal Server does not really care what the SQL Server topology is because this is abstracted from the server farm deployment. So therefore, you can be running any supported SQL topology, and SharePoint Portal Server views it as a single server installation for topology purposes. In these scenarios, it's important, I think, to note the distinction between network load balancing and clustered server arrays. On the front end, on those servers that accept web requests and pass them to the back-end server, I'll configure those servers in a network load balance cluster. A network load balance cluster are multiple servers that are configured in almost precisely the same way in every occasion, and accept client requests, balance those client requests across the front end, and then pass those requests back to the back end servers. On the back end, on my SQL servers, I'll depend on a clustered configuration. That is to say, I'll have multiple servers configured for redundancy, clustered, and in the event that one of those servers fails, there will be an automatic failover to the other server in the server or servers in the cluster. And so there is a distinction between NLB, network load balancing, and clustered arrays. NLB on the front end, clustered arrays on the back end. A large server farm is similar to the medium server farm, except that the search and web components run on different systems. And large server farms can support more servers than a medium farm. So the minimum topology for a large server farm is 2 front-end and web servers running SharePoint, 2 search servers running SharePoint, 1 index management server running SharePoint, and 1 database component running Microsoft SQL Server. The SQL component can be either a single server or a clustered server, but because the cluster acts like one system, it will be considered as a single component, right? The large server farm can be scaled out by adding front-end web servers in an NLB cluster, search servers, or index management servers. You cannot have more than 4 search servers or 4 index management servers in any farm. Because only 4 catalogs can be consumed by the search servers, having more than 4 index management servers will cause search to function improperly, as some content sources will not be searched. Both medium and large server farms support running one server with the backward compatible document libraries. There can be only one server in the farm that has these components. Like the Highlander, there can be only one. In addition, each medium and large server farm requires 1 job server. So the job server role must be assigned to an index management server, in part because the job server is responsible for indexing all portal site content and people. So successful server hardening depends on a server topology and logical architecture that are designed for targeted isolation and secure communication. Successful server topology design incorporates dedicated web front-end servers Windows SharePoint Services search role and database server role are protected from direct user access. Office SharePoint servers hosting application server roles and database server roles are also protected from direct user access. Windows SharePoint Services has the SharePoint Central Administration site that is hosted on the same server computer where the Windows SharePoint Services search role is hosted. The Office SharePoint server has the SharePoint Central Administration site that is hosted on a dedicated application server such as the index server. The networking topology has all servers within the farm that reside within a single data center on the same virtual LAN. Access is allowed through a single point of entry, which is the firewall. For a more secure environment in Windows SharePoint Services, separate the farm into 3 tiers: Windows Web Front End, Search, and Database, separated by routers or firewalls at each VLAN boundary. For a more secure environment in Office SharePoint Server, separate the farm into 3 tiers: Web Front End, Application Servers, and Database, separated by routers or firewalls at each VLAN boundary. So, there's a distinction there from prior versions of SharePoint to the current 2007 implementation. In those prior versions, in my DMZ, or maybe not in the DMZ, maybe actually in an internet-facing role out on the web, I have my web front end. Then in the DMZ, I have my search, and then back behind the DMZ, I have my database. Or I could choose to have multiple DMZs. The web front end servers sit in the first DMZ, the application center servers sit in the second DMZ, and the database servers sit inside the firewalls on my internal network with Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007. The logical architecture design has at least one zone in each web application that uses Windows authentication. So this is required for the search account to crawl content within the web application. Implement web applications using host headers instead of the randomly generated port numbers that are automatically assigned. Don't use IIS host header bindings if the web application will be hosting host header-based site collections. In a reverse proxy environment, you can consider using the default port for the public-facing network while using a non-default port on your internal network. What this does is it can help prevent simple port attacks on your internal network that assume HTTP will always be on port 80, right? Port 80, the UHP, the Universal Hacking Port. So I can change that off. The suggestion has been made, do not put an untrusted site into the same web application as trusted sites. This protects against intra-domain scripting attacks. Rather, use separate application pool accounts for central administration and each unique web application. The operating system has a server operating system that is configured with the NTFS file system for increased security. Also, clocks on all servers within the farm are synchronized, which is ideal for farm maintenance and accuracy in file logs. Now, there are also options with the selection of secure communications. And so here, we can see channels. If your servers are not inside a physically secure data center, where the network eavesdropping threat is considered insignificant, you need to use an encrypted communication channel to protect data sent between servers. In a Windows SharePoint Services or MOS server farm, server-to-server communication is extensive. Securing the communication helps ensure that sensitive data is not compromised and also helps protect the server computers from malicious attacks or unintentional threats. In a Windows SharePoint Services environment, the search and indexing components share the same server role. In an Office SharePoint server environment, these roles can be installed on different server computers. SSL and IPsec, right, Secure Sockets Layer and Internet Protocol Security, SSL and IPsec can both be used to help protect communications between servers by encrypting traffic. Which method to choose depends on the specific communication channels you are securing and the benefits and trade-offs that are most appropriate to your organization. So IPsec is generally recommended for protecting the communication channel between two servers and restricting which computers can communicate with one another. So for example, you can help protect a database server by establishing a policy that permits requests only from a trusted client computer, such as an application or web server. You can also restrict communication to specific IP protocols and TCP UDP ports. The networking requirements and recommendations for a Windows SharePoint Services Office SharePoint Server farm make IPsec a good option. Also, all servers are contained on one physical LAN, which improves IPsec performance. Servers are assigned static IP addresses. IPsec can also be used between trusted Windows Server 2003 or Windows 2000 domains. So for example, you can use IPsec to secure communications of a web or application server in a perimeter network connecting to a computer running SQL Server on the internal network. The general recommendations for using SQL, or not SQL, using SSL. So the general recommendations for using SSL is to use the encryption method when you need granular channel protection for a particular application instead of for all applications and services running on a computer. So SSL must be implemented by individual applications. Therefore, you cannot use SSL to encrypt all communications between two hosts. In addition, SSL is less flexible than IPsec because it only supports authentication by means of public key certificates. SSL does provide several distinct advantages, however. Most significantly, SSL is supported by a wide variety of servers and clients, right? It's ubiquitous. And the maturity of the standard has practically eliminated interoperability problems. So SSL is common, well supported, commonly supported, well known, and most interoperable. It may not be practical to secure all client-server communication. However, there are several scenarios that justify the extra configuration required to secure communication between clients and servers within your server farm. First is secure collaboration with partners, where partners are accessing and contributing to applications in an extranet environment. Next is remote employee access, where employees are accessing internal data remotely. So, for example, customers might be required to log on to an internet news site or provide personal information to complete a business transaction. Finally, basic or forms authentication discovers if you are using either of these methods of authentication and credentials are sent in the clear. At a minimum, secure the client-server communications for the logon page. SSL is generally recommended to secure communication between users and servers where sensitive information must be secured. SSL can be configured to require server authentication on both server and client authentication. So traditionally, SSL When I, as a user, connect to the web front end, I'm going to connect securely using SSL. When the web front end server connects back to the SQL database, I would prefer that to be using IPsec internally. So I think of SSL for, and clearly these are not rules that are set in stone, but it is certainly common practice. SSL for client to web front end, IPsec internally, server to server. Now, SSL can decrease the performance on the network. There are several common guidelines that you can use to optimize pages that use SSL. First, use SSL only for pages that require it. So this includes pages that contain or capture sensitive data, such as passwords or other personal data. Use SSL only if you want to encrypt the page data or you want to guarantee that the server to which you send the data is the server that you expect. For pages where you must use SSL, you should make the page size as small as possible and avoid using graphics that have large file sizes. If you use graphics, choose ones that have smaller file sizes and resolution. In a server farm environment, individual servers play specific roles. What are those roles? And what are some of the security hardening recommendations for these servers? Well, the security hardening recommendations really depends on the role that each server plays. So the server hardening recommendations for Windows SharePoint services and Office SharePoint Server are built on top of the recommendations provided in the Patterns and Practices security guides published by Microsoft. Someone had asked the question earlier in the question manager, where can I get practices, policy, best practices, and guidance? Well, those recommendations are actually provided in the Patterns and Practices security guides that we publish. So they're out there and they're available. These guides follow a methodical approach to securing servers for specific roles and for securing the supporting network. The order in which settings are applied and applications are installed and hardened is prescribed as well, starting with applying patches and updates and then hardening network settings, operating system settings, and followed by application-specific hardening. In addition, each of these guides includes a secure snapshot, a list of recommended security settings for either the specific server role or for the network. The snapshot lists are organized by categories that correspond to particular security settings. The security design and hardening guidance provided in Windows SharePoint Services and Office SharePoint Server security content is based on the practices published in these two guides. These guides assume that you will use them as a baseline for securing and hardening your server farm. The nature of server-to-server communication within a Windows SharePoint service, MOS server farm, and the specific features provided by Windows SharePoint services and MOS are the primary reason for Windows SharePoint services MOS-specific hardening recommendations. And that takes us just about to the end. So, in summary, SharePoint 2007 offers various authentication methods to enable a more secure environment. Windows SharePoint Services 3.0 has authentication that has been redesigned on top of the new authentication provider with ASP.NET 2.0. If you don't want to maintain users inside Active Directory, you can now use ASP.NET authentication providers to store and manage user accounts. Maintaining security permissions provides a safe environment within the SharePoint 2007 family. Administrators can control access permissions, which enables administration maintenance of the server. And finally, Windows SharePoint Services 3.0 scalability is achieved using an architecture designed with a web farm environment in mind. The architecture is based on stateless front-end web servers that rely on Microsoft SQL Server in the back end for storing content and other site-related data. For more information, go to microsoft.com/technet/DSK107. That's DSK107. And I encourage you to hit that website. You'll find a number of additional resources there. Non-Microsoft publications, there is Microsoft Office SharePoint 2007 Development Unleashed, and this discusses the various uses of Microsoft Office SharePoint 2007 from the developer's standpoint. Training courses 3369, 3370, available at your local Microsoft Certified Training Center. And you can assess your skills at Microsoft.com/assessment. The Microsoft Skills Assessment is a free online learning tool. It's a very easy way for IT professionals to check their skills. You can quickly check your skills in implementing or managing Microsoft products or business solutions. Just take a short 30-question assessment and see how well you know your stuff. This is great. This is very valuable if you are getting ready to take a certification exam. It's a good way to know that you're ready to take that test. Become an MCP, Microsoft.com, WAC Learning, WAC MCP. And guys, if you're not, oops, sorry, I had a problem with the slides advancing. So more information, Microsoft.com/technet/DSK107. We did not see that up there, did we? /DSK107. And of course, check out the virtual labs. The virtual labs are great. That's an online sandboxed environment where you can give this technology a test drive. Here's that book I mentioned. This is MOS Development Unleashed. This is available at this is available online and in major bookstores. Training resources, course 3369 and 370. The assessment page, Microsoft.com/assessment. If you're getting ready to take a test, if you're looking to get Exchange certified or get your Windows 2003 MCSE before it goes away, right? Longhorn server is coming, so if you didn't upgrade, if you're MCSE 2000, you haven't upgraded to 2003, you have very little time left to be able to do that with just taking the 2 tests. And learn more about those testing and certification procedures at Microsoft.com/learning/MCP. Guys, if you're not certified, I'm a big believer in certification. I spent about 7 years doing certification training and corporate training in Manhattan. And I know, I've seen it in the marketplace. Guys that are certified make more money. They get more job offers. They just do. And I think about certification not so much as job training, but I think about it as career training. Because with certification prep and training, you really get exposure to things that you don't do in your job every day, right? And so that's valuable. That's very valuable for helping you take the next step in your career. I was an NT4 MCSE. I was a Windows 2000 MCSE. I'm Windows 2003 MCSE. And I'm getting ready now to start taking the Longhorn server certification process and ramp up for that, which will start when we release Longhorn, which is probably about a year out. We're probably about a year out for that. This message is brought to you by our sponsor, Microsoft TechNet. If you are not a TechNet subscriber, TechNet is the resource for IT pros managing Windows networks. Get all of your security bulletins, updates, hotfixes, patches, service packs on CD delivered to your door, not to mention a wealth of learning resources. And now TechNet Plus includes software without time limits. So when you get a TechNet subscription, or go to Microsoft.com or no, I'm sorry, go to technetevents.com, www.technetevents.com. Find an event in your area, come on out to one of our TechNet events, and when you're at a TechNet event, we generally give away a subscription to TechNet Plus. So come on out and maybe I will hand you a TechNet Plus subscription. Very valuable tool and very reasonably priced. Here's a great eye chart about Microsoft TechNet. And where else can you get help? At the community pages, man. Turn to your peers for help. The news groups, the Microsoft managed news groups are a great resource. Webcasts are up there. Podcasts are up there. Download that stuff. Exploit it. I don't know about you, but I am not interested in technology for the sake of technology. I am interested in technology because of what it does for me, because of how it makes my life easier. And out at Microsoft.com/technet/community, there's a lot of folks sharing information about how to make your life easier and leverage this technology. So let me check the queue. Let me see if there's some questions in there. We have a couple minutes. Maybe we'll be able to answer some of those questions now. And let me also turn it over to Janet for the survey.
Thanks, Michael. And as Michael mentioned, if you have questions for him, now's the time to get those into that queue, and he'll take a moment and answer them in just a moment. As he mentioned earlier, we do record these webcasts, so if you'd like to see anything that's been previously recorded as well as anything that's coming up, everything's posted right there at Microsoft.com/webcast. We'd love to hear it if you have content ideas, anything you want to see us do differently on these webcasts. We'd love to get your input and hear from you. There is a URL there where you can contact us and let us know what you'd like to see us do differently. So today's webcast was presented using the Microsoft Office Live Meeting technology. There's a free 14-day trial. All you have to do is go to Microsoft.com/presentlive. You'll be able to get that. Michael mentioned we have that survey coming up. I want to point out, not only is your feedback very valuable to us, but for filling out our survey, you'll automatically be entered into a drawing to win this great little Zoom digital media player. And no, Michael, you're not able to evaluate yourself and get enrolled for that.
Imagine my surprise.
So I'm going to post up that survey. You should all be seeing that survey now in your slide area. Take a moment, fill it out before you log out. We do appreciate that. We do pass along that information on to our presenters as well. So if you have comments for Michael in there, you can also put them into that area. Any questions coming into the queue that you want to wrap up with?
There's one, and it's where's the best place to go to get best practice guidance for development in SharePoint. And I am pasting a link into the question and answer window now. It's a little broad of a question because really, folks, we've got a lot of resources online. You know, if you poke around at Microsoft.com a little bit, or a great place to go is to go into the SharePoint news groups and chat some folks up in there and ask them, what has been their practical experience in leveraging some of this stuff. But I did post a link into the question manager window regarding that question, and that's it. Those are the only questions in the queue. So ladies and gentlemen, I deeply appreciate your time, your attention, and your patience today. I encourage you for follow-up on this to go to Microsoft.com/technet/DSK107 and for more information on this and other topics related to this.
Great. I'm going to remind everybody also that there were some great resources there at the end in addition. And if you'd like to print a PDF of these slides, you can go into your File menu in your upper navigation bar, and you'll be able to do a print PDF of those as well. So nice to have some of that information. So once again, your feedback is very valuable. Please do take a moment, fill out that survey before you log out. We do appreciate that feedback. And with that, I am going to extend a special thanks to Michael for today's presentation. So thank you so much, and that concludes today's TechNet Live meeting. So thank you, everybody, for joining us in our